I would like to take a second and introduce the panel leader for this is Dr. Alvin Curette Jr. He is a proud husband and father, and he is currently teaching at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He also presents on topics related to critical race studies in education. Joining him on the panel is Dr. Kristina Campos-Davis, who is the Executive Director of Communications for the Texas State Technical College System. She is also currently leading a community-wide conversation about race and equality in Abilene, with more than 50 community leaders commissioned by the mayor of Abilene. And also joining them would be Amy Boone, who is a teaching and learning specialist at ACU. As part of her work in the Adams Center for Teaching and Learning, she has gotten to lead faculty and allyship work and through books about racial justice. Amy also serves on the advisory team for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Without any further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Alvin Curette.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you. So good morning to everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed the first panel discussion. And so we will we'll jump into our discussion. But before we do so, I want to offer some words of thanks and also sort of frame the book a bit so that we can better sort of understand the direction of our discussion today. So first, I want to thank Abilene Christian University, the Carl Spain Center on Race Studies and Spiritual Action, and the Summit Planning Committee for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Taylor for his continued leadership in helping us recognize that racism is a sickness of the heart that can only be cured through spiritual action. I'm also honored to share in this discussion with Ms. Amy Boone and Dr. Kristina Campos-Davis. We have been charged with examining white supremacist ideology through a compilation of newsletters authored by James Mason. Mason began writing for Siege, the monthly newsletter of the National Socialist Liberation Front, in 1980. Though the NSLF collapsed in the 1980s, Mason continued producing the newsletter until 1986. Mason's writings were published in book form in 1992, and fittingly, the book was entitled Siege. The book is idealized by many contemporary white supremacist organizations and is viewed as a cookbook and guide for members, garnering praise for its instruction on direct, violent action that promotes vicious racism and anti-Semitism. Siege continues to serve as a recruitment tool and an influential teaching manuscript for many violent white supremacist groups, including the Anti-Waffen Division, or AWD. These extremist groups align with Mason's belief that modern society cannot be redeemed and needs to be completely overthrown, which is implied in the title Siege. These white supremacist organizations have a mission to usher in a race war that will lead to an apocalyptic collapse of a government and society, which will leave us with a white ethno-state or whites-only utopia. The promotion of Siege through podcasts, websites, and social media has inspired a violent online culture that is devoted to Mason's vision for independent terror cells to spark a race war. James Mason, the mastermind behind Siege, was born in 1952 and grew up in Ohio. He has associated with various factions of the American Nazism parties or sector since the age of 14, including the American Nazi Party, which was later known as the National Socialist White People's Party, and the National Socialist Liberation Front. So as we prepare our hearts and our minds to enter into this discussion, please consider the following biblical text, Ephesians 6 and 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. This verse is important because it reminds us that we're not warring against James Mason. We're not warring against racist individuals or a particular white supremacist organization. Even Mason himself asserted that National Socialism is not a person or a group. It is an ideology. It is a religion. Consequently, we must realize that our battle is forged against spiritual wickedness, evils, and darkness brought forth by white supremacist ideology. This is and always has been a spiritual war. So now let us hear from our esteemed panelists. And so the first question that I want to throw out to our panelists is, when you reflect upon the book and upon America as a whole, how do white supremacist beliefs and practices continue to infiltrate and show up in American culture? Amy, if you could start us off, that would be great.
Sure, thanks so much, Alvin. One of the things that someone referenced in the first session, the Robert P. Jones' White Too Long, and not to steal the thunder on that, but the Spain Center is going to host a panel about that next month. So I really encourage you to read that and attend that as well. In reading that and reading some other material, getting ready for this panel, one thing that I think came to my mind is I look at Mason and I think, I mean, he's just kind of fringe, you know? I mean, are there really people who think like he does and are that overt in their white supremacy thinking? And then I remember a person like Dylann Roof. And Roof was a white Christian terrorist who murdered 9 people in the Emmanuel AME Church in 2015. And in his journal, the following words were found. I see some people who seem to use Christianity as an excuse for not doing anything. They tell themselves they are being pious, but they are really being cowardly. Their piety is their excuse, but Christianity doesn't have to be this weak, cowardly religion. There's plenty of evidence to indicate that Christianity can be a warrior's religion. And so that gives me a lot of pause, because if you take that quote just at face value, it doesn't necessarily sound like someone who would do something so extreme, which then makes me think, okay, there's something going on in our churches and our white Christian communities that is somehow connecting these ideologies in a way that they can be merged in very evil ways. And so, you know, the media didn't really say a lot about his faith beliefs, but Roof's home denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, they took note that Roof was a member in good standing. And so he had been hearing the teachings of the Bible and of Christ. And one of their pastors, Lenny Duncan, said, white supremacy doesn't need active racists to function. It's a demonic system with a life of its own. It's a radical evil. So I think the awareness that while we think sometimes someone like Mason or Roof is fringe, these ideologies are making their way into our churches, into our Christian communities, and we have to call them out for what they are.
Thank you, thank you.
And I think too, I mean, the idea that Christianity is a warrior religion or that there are warriors for Christ kind of thing is not a new ideology, right? I mean, that goes back to the Crusades, that goes back to the Inquisition, that goes way, way back in history. I mean, the church has always had the ability to turn into something that becomes pretty violent and pretty overbearing, you know, very easily. I think what is special here, and I think you're right, Amy, about Ruth in particular, but then also with James Mason, is that there's a normalization of this belief system that becomes just part of the national conversation. You know, I think that the previous panel talked about how you just get kind of a foot in the door, and that's all you need in order to be able to get into people's thinking. And I think that's exactly what's occurred, you know, since, you know, the early 2000s and 2010s is this idea that there's just this tiny bit of white supremacy that gets in the door. And once it does that, then there's an opening for other people to come in and believe that. And if you look at the thinking in the United States, in some not fringe, but very normalized groups, there is just this general belief, and I think Dr. Foster talked about it in the previous session, right, of, well, you know, this is our home, this is not their home, or this is, you know, our country, not their country. And so there's this invasion and this need to protect ourselves, protect our borders from the, you know, those who are trying to invade.
Thank you. And I know during one of our conversations, we raised the question, how prevalent is thinking that aligns with sort of Mason's view or his extremist views of white supremacist ideology. And one of the things that you brought up, Amy, is that oftentimes we hone in on or we focus on structural racism, those of us who acknowledge that structural racism exists. And so we discuss and we have discourse, you know, around economic practices, practices within education, housing, medical care, all those things. But it's less existent for us to really talk about these extremist groups and white nationalism. And one of the questions that I sort of asked is it because it's not comfortable to really think about these extreme views and these ideologies that call for war and for battle? And so I wanted to bring that up because I think that what Mason is really putting out there and what we're talking about is that this ideology is real. It's a movement, and people are willing to die for it. Okay.
And we have seen that happen more and more. I mean, I think about groups like Richard Spencer's groups, you know, and other kind of white, you know, supremacist groups that, yes, are very quick to not only be willing to die, but be willing to kill in order to continue their ideology. I mean, look at the people who have, you know, been harmed, just, you know, peaceful protests like the Black Lives Matter protests that have happened all across this country. And they become targets for groups like this. And you know, if you go and look at the words and the speeches of Richard Spencer and men like him, I mean, they are, I think as Trice said in the previous session, they are bringing together, you know, just white, affluent young men who feel a little lost and feel like they possibly, you know, don't have all that they should have, you know, because they're white and because they're male. And it has turned into something that's really, really violent.
Thank you. Okay, so as we move along in the discussion, so given that ideas of peace and peacemaker are part of the theme for this summit's pathway, how do ideas presented in siege threaten peace within our churches and American society?
A couple of things that stood out to me. One was that Mason talks about, he keeps saying big brother. And so it reminded me a lot of the narrative that I'll hear on the internet from people talking about deep state. And so there's this kind of, this boogeyman that's out there somewhere. And so it's this conspiracy theory of there's someone out there pulling these strings. And if a person believes that, you're not going to have peace. You're not going to have peace if you believe that these conspiracies are always perpetuating. Another thing that he talks about a lot is this really strong protectionist individualism. And he talks a lot about you need to protect your own home with your own guns. And there's very little talk of being a member of a community or working together or creating bridges over divides. We've already mentioned this, but he has a lot of warlike language. And I mean, that kind of goes without saying, when we're using warlike language, we're not talking about peace. We're just not. This may seem a little off topic, but this definitely struck me as I was reading through his material. he is very patriarchal. And so he has this kind of patriarchal hierarchy in his mind of white men, and then even white women are under him and those like him, and then people who are not white below that. And so one of the things that he even said was, quote, women should be motivated and led by men. And so that's obviously not a peaceful perspective, to have this kind of hierarchy of who's in charge and who reports to who, and that kind of thing.
Dr. Campos-Davis.
Yeah, I mean, and I was going to say, I mean, I think, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about kind of racism, but to lay then that patriarchal kind of language on top of that, let's get into some of that intersectionality thinking, right? Where, you know, not only are we now dealing with just white being better than black, is what, you know, racist would say. We're now talking about white men, white women, black men, black women, and then even on top of that, Latino men, Latino women, and where, you know, are these hierarchies? And, you know, it makes me think about the verse from Ephesians that you started out with, Alvin, when you were talking about, you know, this is the power structure that we have to fight. We have to think about. We have to really kind of look at ways in which it has infiltrated our churches and infiltrated our families and infiltrated our communities. I see that one of the viewers from the previous session asks, I'm an elder in a church. I'm curious, what can I do to help this conversation about racial injustice in my own church and in churches, you know, around the country? And I think it starts with something as simple as being willing to accept the ideology of white supremacy and the ideology that it exists, and then being willing to talk about it openly within your church, within your community, within your family, and a part of that being patriarchy as well. Being willing to recognize that these things exist and are normalized in many of our churches and in so many of our cultures and in our families even. And then once you recognize that, then being willing to really confront them. And I think in kind and in helpful ways, as opposed to in, you know, ways that would be more angry, if that makes sense. You know, what I have found in the sessions that I run with several different churches here in Abilene and with the mayor's, you know, group that I work with, is that it's a lot of white men who want to just be a part of the conversation, but they don't know where to step in. And so giving white men and white women and all of us a place to sit together around a table and have a conversation about race and a conversation about patriarchy, I think is where it starts.
Thank you. Yeah, and so, you know, as we were talking about this, I think what struck me about Mason, because we're speaking to Christians and to churches to a large degree, is that he is a self-proclaimed atheist, but he also posits that he cannot completely dismiss God because there's no evidence to support or dismiss God. And he references Jesus, and he references a creator and a God, even through his writings. As a matter of fact, he compares Hitler and figures like Charles Manson to Jesus Christ. And the point he's trying to make is that at the time, even Jesus was misunderstood. And people did not understand or appreciate the message he was bringing forth. And it wasn't because of Jesus, it was because of their own ignorance, and they could not see the quote unquote light. And so he's positing or asserting that even with people like Charles Manson and Hitler, they were not wrong. It's just that the people at the time could not appreciate sort of this visionary or this way of thinking that they had. And so I thought that really stood out. Because even in the Bible, like the devil knows the word of God. Right? The devil knows the word. And so we have to really understand that evildoers know the word, and as was connected by you all in the previous panel, they know the word enough to justify or establish their own evil doctrines, right, and ideologies. The other thing that Mason kind of writes about, and again, he's using sort of spiritual language. He believes that this is a war of life and death. And he truly believes that white supremacists, these extremists, they're fighting for life, because life for them, it represents them going after their predestined rightful place within this racial hierarchy within humanity. And to do otherwise, to sort of live in this racial cesspool with interracial mingling, it is a disgrace to their creator and to their predecessors and their children and so forth. So I think this language in terms of divisiveness, it's critical for us to really recognize that, because we can see remnants of it in our society and in our churches. And as was stated before, and Dr. Campos-Davis, you pointed this out, if we allow sort of remnants of this type of thinking to enter into our churches and our communities, our homes and our institutions, that foot in the door can really turn into something larger and more powerful, right? So the last thing I'll say on that in terms of the division, the divisiveness, is Mason has this vision. He cast this vision where whites would sort of live in their units or within their homes together, tribes together, communities together, and then finally again, they would be a nation, right? A nation of good white people. And so when we think about sort of the way we are divided, where we worship, where we live, where we go to school, where we shop, where we entertain, again, this sort of reflects some of that thinking, and we can do it more so if we're not careful and conscious about it. Okay, so I know that one of the things that we all wanted to do was to sort of bridge the book, but really go into some action-oriented conversation, given that white supremacy exists, sort of what we can do about it. So the next question that I have is what can Christians, churches, and other Christian institutions do to help bridge the racial divide and combat racial injustice? And then the second part to that question is, how can churches engage in this type of activism and maintain peace?
Yeah, thanks, Alvin. I've been thinking a lot lately about a couple of different things that MLK Jr. said. And one, he talked about protesting, and we kind of all know what that means. And there's obviously a time and a place where that's highly appropriate. The other thing that has really captured my imagination is how he talks about being disruptive. And I think that in our the way we normally think about that word, we think about being disruptive as being a negative. So we think about our classrooms, and we have a student who's disruptive. That feels problematic. But often a disruption is an insertion of something to catch our attention. So if I'm driving down the road and someone honks at me and I've just kind of been on autopilot, they've disrupted me, but maybe it's for a good reason. Maybe it's because I was about to hit someone, or I wasn't aware of something. So I've been thinking a lot about this idea of how could we be disruptive to these systems that are so ingrained for hundreds of years, really, and just become this kind of perpetuated cycle where we have these hierarchies and white supremacy moving through our systems. How can we disrupt those? And so I think one of the biggest ways we can do that is to ask questions. And so whatever places where we move and live, in our churches, in our universities, in our local school districts, with our politicians who represent us, with different entities like that, we need to ask questions, and we need to get into those places where we can ask questions, so we're actually invested. So I'll give you a little example from something that I did a couple of years ago. And Kristina, I think you may have done this too. I don't think that we talked about this, but I participated in the Citizens Police Academy in Abilene. And so the Abilene Police Department is known as being a very highly thought of department. And so a few years ago, when I really started becoming more aware of things like police violence and racial profiling, I thought, well, I wonder if that happens a lot in my city, because as a white woman, I've never experienced anything really bad with police. And so I really was curious. So I found out about this program and I highly recommend it. It was phenomenal and I learned so much, and the things were affirmed that I had heard, which was that this police force is run just incredibly well. But when I got in there, I was able to ask questions that might seem kind of disruptive. I was able to say, what kind of implicit bias training do the officers on the APD receive? Well, if they weren't receiving any, then that could definitely feel disruptive, but they were. And so I was able to learn about that and affirm their work. I asked questions about, how do you all deal with racial profiling? And then I learned all about the system, where they have to record the data about the ethnicity, race, etc., about all the encounters that they have and how that data is used for future work. So I think little examples like that of just being disruptive can be meaningful. I think it could also mean finding places in those systems that you could volunteer. So if we know, here's just another example that's kind of a practical one. We know just by numbers that there are more children in the CPS system who are removed from homes who are not white. That's just the facts. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and that could be another whole session. But if we know that's true, there's some things going on in that system that might not be great. And so I think about people who become foster families. That's a way to be disruptive. People who become CASAs, that's a way to disrupt. In that system, you're just getting in there and being a voice for change. I think about even things that you could do, like delivering Meals on Wheels, getting involved with a school in your community that serves more non-white students, and they may be less resourced. I think there are just so many ways that we can be a positive disruptive force. But I also want to say that I think one of the most important things is something that I learned from Austin Channing Brown when we brought her to our campus last year. She talked about the idea that white people often center themselves because that's the way our country is set up. We're just used to that. And so sometimes we need to step back, and instead of saying, what can I do? What can I do to come in and fix this or save this situation or make things better? Can I look around and find a person of color who's already doing that work, and can I elevate that voice? Can I elevate that person's work and say, hey, can I come alongside you? Can you lead me in doing this work with you? And I just think those are some ways that we can decenter whiteness, which breaks down white supremacy, and help be part of this kind of disruption of the systems that are just in place that seem to just, one of the things that Robert P. Jones says is we just become like we have amnesia. We just forget that these systems are even in place. So I'll pass it off with that word.
And it's difficult because I feel like there are two sides here. You know, on the one hand, I think you're absolutely right, Amy. I mean, having, you know, the white allies who are willing to assist and also, you know, help to project people of color who are doing good work and make sure that that gets out there is very important. By the same token, you know, and Latasha Morrison writes about this in her Be the Bridge book, where, you know, when you are a person of color in a generally white community, you are the one person everybody comes to with all of their questions about what is it like to be Black, and what is it like to have this, and what kind of discrimination have you felt, and how does it feel? And after a while, that is exhausting, right? And so also giving people of color who are advocates and allies and activists out there chances to relax and chances to breathe are also very important. And so I've noticed that even in my own activism, as you know, there have been times when there are big movements or big things like happening here in Abilene, everybody's like, okay, are you going? Are you going to be there? And it's like, I support it 100%, but I need this evening with my family, or I need a break because it's been so much all the time. And so I feel like you just need to have a good kind of hold on the ebb and flow of the people who are out there and the kind of things that they need to support them and their movement. And if they need a break, then being willing to pick up and to help along the way to make sure that the movement continues and the activists continue, because this is not, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it's something
Right.
that, my parents have been doing and my grandparents did. And, I'm sure, Dr. Curette, your grandparents and your parents have been doing and fighting and working through, and all of us. And it's something that we need to be able to continue so that it doesn't lose momentum. And that's where we have to help each other out.
Yeah, Kristina, I think that your point is so good, because the second part of the question that Alvin asked was, how can churches engage in this type of activism and maintain peace? And I think the key is what you said about realizing that this is a life work. And this isn't okay, let's get in there and fix this thing, and then we can,
we'll have a Bible study and we'll be done. Yeah.
Right. And one of the things I think that was powerful to me that Austin Channing Brown said was that one of the words that she has seemed to shy away from is this idea of reconciliation, because that means you're reconciling something that was maybe good before. And often she said she finds that white people see that as, okay, well, if I just apologize and you accept my forgiveness for whatever wrongs we may have done, then we can just move on. Well, that negates the work. That negates this long arc of needing to be engaged with the work of racial justice as a faith piece for us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And perhaps we have to remember that peace does not mean that we won't have disagreements.
Sure.
We perhaps, sometimes we have to really flesh out how we are going to achieve a goal of racial justice. And we have to grapple with that within our churches. And it doesn't mean that there will be an absence of disagreement. So thank you all. Thank you all for that. So this is our last planned question, because I know we wanted to open this up for some Q&A. And again, as we sort of think about our roles as Christians, we've already established that what we're warring against is an ideology. It's a system. It's evil. So the question is, how does our affiliation with Jesus Christ uniquely position us to speak against racial injustice and white supremacy?
I've been thinking so much about this idea, and I probably have way too much to say about this and way too many words, but to try to capture a few of the thoughts I've been thinking about lately. I am pretty convinced that power is a really toxic elixir, and that our general human tendency is that we're pretty unwilling to lay down power. We strive for it so hard, and then once we have a little piece of power, it almost has to be removed from us because we're so unwilling often to lay it down. But I think about our witness of Scripture and Jesus' words that the last shall be first and the first shall be last, and Jesus making himself nothing, making himself a servant, and honestly rebuking those who were saying, are you going to bring in some sort of political or national power? I think about even the Beatitudes and the elevation of the poor in spirit, the meek, peacemakers, the merciful. If we attest to these things and we believe that we are who Jesus says that we are, then I think that we are positioned that we must speak up, because each person is created in the image of God. And anything less than that is unacceptable. I think that something that is going on right now in our culture that is bubbling up quickly and very frustratingly to me is that we have a lot of evangelical Christians right now wanting to take their eye off the ball and get lost in the weeds on things that we need to not be thinking about so much. So instead of embracing the fight against racial inequity as a central piece of our faith, what I'm hearing a lot of evangelicals talk about is, well, but what about critical race theory? And what about people just wanting to say white privilege, and I'm not privileged and I had to work for, they're getting lost in the weeds. I feel like that's just a new way to divert the attention from what we need to be thinking about, which is the heart of Jesus and what it means that we are made in the image of God. I'm finding myself getting weary that people are pulling us away and wanting to talk about these other things instead of staying focused on how can we be the best followers of Christ.
And I think we get caught and lost in the weeds. And again, I lean on Latasha Morrison a little bit here because we're uncomfortable talking about it, right? We're uncomfortable looking at our own personal identities and saying, well, I didn't have the same, experience that you did, so it must not be real, right?
Right.
And I
Right.
think what we have to do is we have to be willing to listen to each other's stories in order to understand that, it happens in a lot of different ways. There are microaggressions, there are all of these other ways in which, structural racism plays out in every individual person's everyday life that are important for us to recognize. Dr. Curette, when you were starting the session, you talked about how, Mason mentions that Hitler, was also misunderstood by his culture, and that just like Jesus, was fighting for this ideology or whatever. And it really made me think about, kind of, you can look at somebody and really tell about the fruits of the fruits of what their labor and the fruits of what they're working towards, right? And the fruits of Hitler were death and destruction and just horrific things, right? Whereas the fruits of Jesus's labor were love and inclusion and unity and grace. And those are things that I think, if you're curious about, which kind of ideology or which belief system really kind of is more biblically based, I would look at the fruits of the labor of what's coming out of it and look at the ways in which, kindness and peace and love, come out of so many of the movements that are trying to change our churches out there.
Okay, thank you. So we have some questions that came in. So the first question that I'll throw to you all. So within the church, this person says they have seen where patriotism is highly valued with Anglo congregations. Do you believe that this is a factor or plays a role in perpetuating the white supremacy ideology within the Stone Campbell tradition?
I will say anytime I have been in a church that begins to conflate Christianity with patriotism, it's a big red flag to me because it makes a lot of assumptions about, again, back to what Amy was talking about, who has power and who should have power. And, there's, a lot that Jesus talked about, yes, we want to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but we also want to keep what is the church's for ourselves. And we want to protect the church from that kind of power. And so anytime you see a conflation of those things, it always worries me. And I think all you have to do is look at the way in which those conflations have played out in the last 5 or 6 years in churches to see that, again, this is not the fruits of the labor of what we saw in Jesus's ministry and in Jesus's time. And so, I think it's one of those things that very quickly gets me very concerned. And Dr. Foster put in the chat, and he's right. He recommended the book White Too Long, which is a book that Amy recommended to me that I've started to read that is really, really good about how careful we have to be about conflating patriotism with the church.
I think maybe another piece of that could be, what do we mean when we say patriotism? So are we talking about like, well, I'm patriotic, so I want us to think about how have we been for all of our country's history, and I want us to be like that. Because if that's what we're talking about, then we are definitely elevating white supremacy. That's how our country was founded. But if we're saying, I love this country, and I want it to be the best version of itself, and that's what patriotism means to me, then that could be really powerful. So, Kristina, I think you said it's easy for it to get really tangly, but if we can keep that separated out, I think it's definitely possible to say our love of our country. What do we do when we love something? We want it to be better. We want it to be better for everybody. And if this is a place for all of us and we love it that much, what can we do to make it better without meshing it all together with our faith?
Thank you all. Okay, so I have another question. Hopefully I can frame it correctly. So is it possible for society to go so far into racism that society or culture has to, for all practical sense, end and be rebuilt? And how uncomfortable are we willing to become to fix this? So it's a two-part question.
So whenever I think about something like this, I think about what Germany has had to go through in, you know, its post-Nazi era, and how, I mean, the you know, they have literally had to swing completely in the other direction, to the point where, you know, all Nazi anything has been completely, you know, made illegal anywhere in the country, and where, you know, you cannot walk around a single German city without seeing either a memorial to, or, you know, a museum for, or a conversation about, you know, all of the Jewish people who lost their lives, you know, because of the Nazi regime. And, you know, there's all of these reminders that are constantly available that we messed up, that this was not the right thing for us to do, and this was not a good thing for society, and we have to reshape our society and make sure we never forget, so that we don't ever repeat these same mistakes. And I mean, I guess, you know, that would be probably the best example I could think of. South Africa may be another example of kind of how they've gone back and really made very clear about apartheid and how terrible apartheid was. But, you know, maybe those are the kinds of roads we could look at as possibilities, you know, if there were to be a way to restart our society. I worry because of that kind of conflation of patriotism and Christianity, that there are a lot of people who would not be willing to kind of let everything crumble and kind of rebuild. But that's just a personal opinion.
And the part of that question that stuck out to me was this part about being uncomfortable. I think if we look at our country, white people aren't used to being uncomfortable, because, again, I know I keep saying it, but as Robert P. Jones says, we've been in a state of amnesia. We don't even know what's happening. We forget we forget what was going on back then. And we're just kind of on autopilot because this is all we've known. And so I think the ability for particularly white people to feel uncomfortable about changes in our society is very low. That's just the sense that I get.
Thank you all. When I read that question, or those two questions, I think it puts Mason's writings into context. Because if we boil it down, Mason is advocating for a complete overthrow of government and society, and organizations that align with Mason's ideology. They are committed to starting a race war that they hope will lead to a collapse, so that when everything is destroyed, the society that will persist will be a whites-only sort of state, right? Or a white utopia. Right. And so I think that follow-up to that question is extremely important, because until maybe the last 3 to 4 years, I would have dismissed Mason's thinking as being in a minority, the way that he thinks as being something that I didn't have to be as concerned about. Right. However, as I read his writings and the messages that he sends through his writings, and I look out into the streets of America, and I listen to what's being said on television, and I read the discourse or the rhetoric that's happening within political arenas, it has set up on my heart to recognize that this is real. This movement is real. There are white supremacists who truly have been deeply hurt, and they have a sense that they have lost and they are losing what is rightfully theirs. And so when that term uncomfortable is there, the question that I have to ask myself, and I hope you'll ask it with me, is with that recognition, are we truly treating this with a sense of urgency? Are we thinking about this from an idealistic perspective where we just, well, it exists, however, it'll go away. So as long as we do a little bit, it'll be okay. Or do we truly sense the urgency within this time that we are combating a real spiritual movement that is on the side of darkness and evil? And so I just want to kind of go back to what you all said earlier, is that within our churches, within our homes, within our communities, are we truly committed to doing the work of God, which is to fight against injustice, or are we only committed to doing it as long as we can remain comfortable? So I appreciated that question. I want to be mindful of time, and I want to respect our panelists as well. So if there are any last words before we close, Amy and Dr. Campos-Davis, I want to give the floor to you at this time.
Yeah, Alvin, just as a tag off of what you said, I'd like to close my time here, and Kristina, you please feel free to have another word as well. I'd like to read a quote from Beth Moore. Beth Moore is a Bible teacher and an author, and she basically speaks to what you were just saying, Alvin. I'm just going to read this quote from her. If you're going to let a little name calling keep you from standing up for what you believe according to the word of God is gospel truth, then you're not ready. White supremacy has held tight in much of the church for so long because the racists outlasted the anti-racists. Outlast them. They're going to call you Marxist, liberal, their worst possible derision, and leftist. They're going to make fun of your wokeness, and they're going to say you've departed all faithfulness to the scriptures. If you teach or preach, they'll say you are a false teacher or prophet. And they do this because it's effective. There will be people who believe them, and this is why it has worked for generations. The names and the name calling may be different, but the fear it triggers is the same. No servant of God wants to be seen as unfaithful, so we tone down. I can't say this strongly enough. Stay in your Bibles, read the Old Testament prophets, and watch for verses noting God's displeasure over injustice. Note divine judgment. Start with Isaiah, pore over the Gospels, and watch what compelled and repelled Jesus. Read Acts through Revelation. Stop being intimidated. Don't enter into the name-calling war. Hold your heart as you stand firm. Jesus said a tree is known by its fruit. The fruit that's listed is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The white supremacist way has produced terrible fruit. Endure. In regard to the one who will believe you're on the slippery slope, just keep serving Jesus faithfully. They are looking for you to go off the deep end in a few years, so don't. Stay faithful to Jesus. Time will tell.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Curette, you mentioned this when you said there's kind of this feeling of, well, this is an ideology, and if we just, speak out against the ideology, that's really, kind of all we need to do. And I think what I hear Beth Moore saying, and what I think I hear you saying as well is, and this is what I want to leave us with today, is there needs to be practical action. There need to be actual steps that are taken in our churches where we are asking those uncomfortable questions, or we are elevating women and women of color and people of color to teachers and preachers and leaders within our churches, so that we can open up the churches to those experiences that we don't ordinarily have. And I think she's right. We need to bury ourselves in the Bible and in the stories of the way that God felt in the Old Testament toward injustice, and the way that Jesus treated injustice in the New Testament, because that is where we will, I think, find our foundation that is the foundation for these practical actions that must be taken. But to just ask questions and then sit back and leave it as a conversation, I don't think is going to get us anywhere. We really do have to take those next practical steps.
Thank you all. So I'll guess I'll end our time with some closing words as well. I can't state enough how honored and humbled I've been to be in this space with Dr. Campos-Davis and Amy Boone. So just some thoughts as we wrap up. You know, Mason asserts that a true white person, a white person who truly understands their lineage and who they are, they would recognize that their responsibility is not to a God, but their responsibility is to their ancestors, their families, and their children. And so what that made me think about was this. I think for me, for anyone, we really have to ask the question, who or what is our God? Are we serving our own self-interest? Or are we truly serving the true God who created us all? And then Mason makes it very clear, because I think it helps us to understand sort of the landscape of America right now. Mason states that Jews are the closest counterpart to the Aryan bloodline, and that Black people, brown people are nothing but gray matter, which means that they don't deserve the right to exist. And as a matter of fact, they're only taking up space. And so when we see things that are transpiring in our country and things that have been transpiring, killings, overkill, emptying the gun on Black bodies, it should not surprise us, because this thinking, in terms of a foothold, it has permeated society. So where it's not shooting to apprehend or to stop in the track, but it's shooting to destroy, to dismantle, to overkill. And Mason, he likens people who are not representative of Aryan blood or of whiteness, right? White people, to monsters. And he says, if you're going to kill a monster, you have to blow their heads off, because monsters are not human. They have alien blood. And so one shot won't do. You have to go all out and blast their heads off. And so think about that as we sort of look at what's transpiring, what has been transpiring in terms of how ideologies seep into the very existence of not just American society, but of global society. Okay? And so these are my last words. So Mason and his followers, they believe that they've been endowed with a blood, a special blood that represents the highest racial order on earth. They think that all other blood is alien blood, and it's unworthy of life, unworthy of existence. As Christians, we profess that the blood of the Lamb, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, is irrespective of persons and was shed for everyone. The question we must ask ourselves is, are we focused on the power of the blood of Jesus, or the blood that runs through our veins, the blood that has divided us, that we have been told and conditioned to think that separates us? Are our churches and communities representative of oneness and equality in Jesus, or a racial hierarchy that reeks or reflects remnants of white supremacist thinking? In closing, this is an ideological spiritual war. I cannot state that enough. See, idealism would have us to view white supremacy in all of its forms as fleeting, as something that's fading, a post-racial society. However, after reading Siege and observing what is transpiring in the streets and cities within our country, on our television sets and in American politics, I recognize that white supremacy, including extremist views like those represented by Mason, it's real, it's alive in American society. And so as Christians, we must have a sense of urgency and fully commit to a movement of love, of peace, of sacrifice, and justice for all. Our children's future is at stake. God bless us all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, uh, Dr. Alvin Curette, Dr. Kristina Campos-Davis, and Amy Boone. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.